She was taller than most doorways, carried the title of the tallest bride in history, and even caught the attention of Queen Victoria. But behind the headlines and museum posters was a woman who quietly battled grief, loneliness, and heartbreak. How did Anna Haining Bates go from global spectacle to forgotten tragedy? This is the story they never told you. The girl who outgrew her world. Anna Haining Swan was born on August 6, 1846, in a quiet corner of Nova Scotia. Her parents, Alexander Swan and Anne Graham, were Scottish immigrants raising a large family on farmland. Life in the countryside was simple: early mornings, long days, and kids who blended in with one another. Anna, however, never blended in. By the time she was 4 years old, she stood over 4 feet tall. Her size didn't sneak up gradually. It was obvious from the start that she was growing faster than anyone around her. Some say she weighed 13 pounds at birth, while others believe she started at an average size and just kept expanding with each year. Either way, she outpaced her siblings quickly, and that wasn't a small comparison. She was one of 13 children, but even in a crowd that large, she stood alone. Most kids got new shoes once a year. Anna needed a full wardrobe every few months. Most toddlers played without notice. Anna's every move became something people whispered about. By the time she was 10, she was towering over teachers and neighbors. Strangers passing by would double back just to confirm what they were seeing. It wasn't just height, it was her frame, her posture, the way she made a grown man look small without trying. There wasn't a term for it then. Doctors didn't explain it, but her body kept stretching and swelling, bones lengthening beyond expectation. It would later be recognized as gigantism, a condition triggered by a tumor on the pituitary gland that floods the body with growth hormones. But Anna didn't have a diagnosis. She just knew she was different, and so did everyone else. In her hometown, people watched her grow like they watched crops rise through the soil, fascinated, sometimes nervous, sometimes amazed. Her parents, used to hard work and hard weather, tried to keep things steady. They built her a bigger bed so her legs wouldn't hang off the edge at night. When she couldn't fit into a regular school desk, her father made one by hand. They didn't complain or question it. They adapted because Anna was their child, and this was simply who she was. But outside the home, things were different. Curiosity spread faster than cornfields. People began showing up at the Swan farm, not to buy produce or visit friends, but to catch a glimpse of the big girl. They came on foot, by horse, and eventually in carriages. They brought questions, rumors, and wide eyes. The local paper started running small stories about her, hinting that something extraordinary was happening in their midst. One article even labeled her an infant giantess, a title that would follow her into adulthood. As the visits increased, Anna's home started to feel less like a safe haven and more like an exhibit. Her brothers and sisters could slip into town unnoticed. Anna never could. If she walked into a shop, heads turned. If she stood at a church door, conversations paused. It didn't matter what she wore, how softly she spoke, or how kind she was. Her size erased every other detail in the room. By the time she reached 15, Anna was already 7 feet tall. Her weight had increased significantly, and she filled doorways without meaning to. Small-town doors weren't made for people like her. School chairs cracked under her weight. Staircases felt too narrow. Even simple things like sitting at a kitchen table came with a negotiation: how to bend, where to sit, how not to overwhelm the space. And still her body kept growing. She had passed the average height for a man by the time she was 13. She passed the tallest men in town not long after. Her mother and father, grounded in practicality, tried to offer her a sense of normal. But it was difficult to ignore the impact she had on a room, a street, a town. The attention wasn't always kind. People stared openly. Some asked personal questions. Others whispered behind her back, not realizing their voices carried. It wasn't malice always, but the weight of constant observation started to sink in. Her body was becoming a spectacle, and while no one said it out loud, it was clear her future wouldn't unfold like other girls her age. By this point, her condition wasn't just about height. It shaped everything. It determined how she moved, where she could go, what kind of life might be available to her. Dreams of a quiet life in the countryside, perhaps marriage to a local boy, started to feel impossible. No suitor came knocking. No girl her age could understand the way her joints ached or how her clothes tore after only a few wears. What started as a quiet life in the Canadian countryside was now the center of growing attention. On display before she had a choice. Anna's size didn't just change how she lived, it changed how her family had to live too. As she kept growing, so did the costs. Clothes never lasted more than a few months. Shoes had to be remade constantly. Chairs cracked, beds broke, and everything in the house needed adjustments. These weren't small favors. They were signs that the Swans were doing everything they could to support their daughter. But homemade furniture couldn't stretch the family's budget. The Swans were farmers, and raising 13 kids didn't leave much extra. With Anna's needs getting more expensive, they faced a hard truth. They needed money, and Anna was the center of attention wherever she went. So they did what many struggling families in that era might have done. They started taking her to fairs and exhibitions. People were already showing up at their farm hoping to catch a glimpse of the unusually tall girl. Turning that into a source of income felt less like a decision and more like survival. She was young, still just a child, but townspeople didn't see a kid when she walked through a crowd. They saw the infant giantess. That nickname stuck to her wherever she went. Banners went up, people lined up, and Anna stood on makeshift platforms while strangers stared up at her in amazement. At times they clapped. At other times they whispered. Either way, they kept coming. Her parents took precautions. They never sent her off alone. They avoided shady venues and made sure every fairground or hall was family-friendly. They kept the focus on curiosity rather than shock value. They didn't want their daughter turned into something cruel. But even the safest places weren't really safe when you were the main event. Anna could feel it every time a camera flashed or a group pointed. She wasn't a person in their eyes. She was a story. She stood there, dressed in long gowns made to measure, while crowds paid to see how high her head reached and how wide her shoulders were. People brought measuring tapes and stared like she was a puzzle they needed to solve. Nobody asked her how she was doing or if her feet hurt from standing for hours. They asked how tall she was and whether she could lift a man. And still, she tried to hold on to some sense of normal. When she wasn't on tour, she played piano. She read books. She helped care for her younger siblings, just like any other big sister would. Her hands were bigger, sure, and her footsteps heavier, but she was still Anna. Still the girl who liked music. Still the one who stayed up late reading. Still the sister who gave piggyback rides when no one else could. But even in those quiet moments, she knew her world had shifted. She wasn't just tall anymore. She was someone people talked about in newspapers. She was someone strangers asked about in passing. Some admired her politely. Others came with wide eyes and whispered jokes. All of it left a mark. She could feel the gap growing between her and everyone else her age. Every trip to a new town brought the same routine. Unpack, perform, nod, smile. Try not to think about how people looked at her like an exhibit. But she kept showing up. She kept standing tall. She let the crowds watch and let the cameras snap. She followed her family's lead and did her part to keep them afloat. But inside, she was starting to feel the cost. This wasn't a job she applied for. She wasn't bitter. She wasn't angry. But she was tired. Tired of being looked at instead of seen. Tired of hearing her name said with surprise or laughter. Tired of carrying a body that made the world treat her like a stranger wherever she went. The nickname Infant Giantess followed her into every city. It was printed on posters, mentioned in headlines, whispered at night by guests at the exhibitions. It wasn't cruel on its own, but it reminded her that no one in the crowd saw her as a girl. They saw a phenomenon, a rarity, a living headline. The life she was living wasn't one she designed. It was one that built itself around her. And eventually, she had no choice but to walk the path it carved. A dream that didn't fit the room. Anna wanted more than stages and staring eyes. She wanted chalkboards, books, and a classroom filled with curious students. Teaching wasn't just a passing idea. It was something she truly believed she could do. It offered structure, purpose, and maybe even a chance to live a life where her height didn't define everything. When she spoke of becoming a teacher, people smiled politely. But Anna was serious. She packed her hopes and moved to a new city, staying with her aunt to begin her education. Everything looked promising on paper. She was ready to learn and ready to teach. But when she stepped into the classroom, she realized something most people never have to think about. Her body didn't fit the space, literally. The desks were too small. The chairs creaked under her. Walking through hallways meant ducking under door frames and twisting sideways to squeeze past others. It wasn't just uncomfortable, it was exhausting. It wasn't only the classroom that pushed back. Outside, the streets were no better. Every time she left the house, people stared. Children pointed. Adults whispered or looked twice, pretending not to. The city was supposed to be a place where she could disappear into the crowd. Instead, she stood out even more. Every step felt like walking through fog made of other people's reactions. The dream started slipping. Not because she lacked the skills, not because she wasn't smart enough, but because nothing around her was built to support the life she imagined. Each day added a new reminder. She couldn't find clothes that fit the school's uniform rules. The public benches didn't support her weight. People treated her like she didn't belong, even though all she wanted was to be part of something normal. She kept showing up, hoping things would get easier, but it didn't. The city wasn't cruel to her face, but it wore her down in quieter ways. No one offered to redesign the furniture or adjust the classroom. No one asked if she needed help. They just watched. That slow, constant alienation made it clear. Her path wouldn't be found here. She packed her bags and returned home, her dream half-formed and unfinished. She didn't talk about it much. The disappointment clung to her in silence. Her family welcomed her back, but they knew something had changed. The girl who had once spoken so boldly about becoming a teacher now walked a little slower, a little smaller, even in her giant frame. Her grandmother noticed too. She didn't give lectures or false encouragement. Instead, she reminded Anna of something she'd always carried but sometimes forgot: her Highland blood. She told Anna to be proud of where she came from and to carry herself tall, not because of her size, but because of her strength. That message didn't erase the pain, but it settled into Anna like a quiet anchor. It gave her permission to stop apologizing for taking up space. With time, that shift in thinking created room for something else. She had lost a dream, but she hadn't lost herself. Her body still held power, even if classrooms couldn't contain it. Her voice still had weight, even if students never filled her rows of desks. She had more to offer, and the world still had questions. And soon, she would find herself walking into a future that looked nothing like the one she planned. But this time, the spotlight would be hers to control. Fame, fire, and starting over. Anna's journey into fame began in 1862 when she joined P.T. Barnum's American Museum in New York. She was just 16 years old. The museum wasn't a circus tent, it was a grand showcase of curiosities and performers from all over the world. And Anna, standing nearly 8 feet tall, became one of its biggest draws. Literally, she was given a contract that paid her $23 a week in gold. That may not sound like much today, but at the time, it was a fortune. She also kept the rights to her own image, which was rare. Most performers had their likeness plastered on posters and souvenirs with zero control. Anna, however, got a cut from the photos sold with her name on them. It was one of the few times her size worked in her favor in a real financial way. The museum gave her more than money. It gave her something she hadn't felt in a long time: control over her story. Instead of being dragged from town to town without a say, she stood on a stage and told her story herself. People still came to stare, but now they also listened. She answered questions about her life, explained her routines, and gave the audience more than just her measurements. She showed them her voice. She didn't just stand there like a statue, she performed. She played Lady Macbeth, reciting Shakespeare in a deep, clear voice that filled the hall. She brought emotion and power to the stage. She wasn't pretending to be a character, she was showing them that she could be more than just a towering figure in a dress. She could act, she could entertain, and she could do it on her terms. Behind the scenes, she took lessons in piano and voice. Her schedule was packed, but she made time to learn. The museum became her school, her job, and her platform all at once. In between shows, she practiced music and learned how to navigate the world as a working woman in a place that finally gave her room to stand tall. People around her respected her. They saw how punctual she was, how polite, how serious about her craft. She wasn't treated like a joke. She was one of Barnum's top attractions, and the press began to write about her not just as a curiosity, but as a performer. She had come a long way from the fairs and small-town exhibitions, but everything changed on a single day in 1865. The museum caught fire. It started small, but the building was packed with wooden walls, paper posters, and oil lamps. The flames spread fast. People screamed, rushed to exits, and tried to save what they could. Anna was inside, performing. She didn't panic. She looked for the safest way out, but there was one huge problem. She was too large to fit through the windows. The stairs were in flames. The exits were blocked. Smaller people slipped through narrow halls or climbed through tight windows. Anna couldn't do either. Her body, which had made her famous, had now become a physical trap. There was no way out alone. 18 people helped carry her out. Some were staff, some were strangers. She didn't beg or cry. She stayed calm, trying not to weigh them down as they lifted her across the smoky hall. It took effort, coordination, and urgency, but they got her out. Anna was one of the last to leave the building. She had waited behind, helping others find the exit before looking for her own. When she finally made it out, she had nothing left. Her clothes, her earnings, her music books, her letters, everything she owned burned in the fire. The museum was reduced to rubble. For most performers, that meant the end of the road. No stage, no job, no money. But for Anna, something else began to grow in that space where everything had been lost. She was devastated. She didn't hide that. But people noticed something else. How she had stayed behind to help others, how she kept calm when her own escape looked impossible, how she never made the moment about herself. Her bravery stood out in ways that had nothing to do with her height. People who once saw her as just a marvel began to speak about her as a human being. Her courage shifted something. It made her story more than just a tale of rare biology. It became a story about someone who, in a moment of panic, thought about others first. The fire erased years of progress, but it couldn't erase what people had seen in her that day. She had lost everything material, but gained something that couldn't be burned down. A reputation that stretched beyond posters and stage lights. From the ashes of that disaster, Anna was about to rebuild again. But this time, the spotlight would lead her far beyond New York, into places and connections she never imagined. A royal friendship in an unexpected world. This time, Anna's travels took her far beyond the towns and theaters of North America. As her reputation grew, so did the invitations. She began touring across Europe, standing in grand halls and old-world cities, performing and meeting people from all walks of life. At first, it was hard to believe. A monarch, mourning the loss of her beloved Prince Albert, heard of Anna through the press. The Queen, known for her strict standards and deep sense of propriety, became quietly fascinated by Anna's story. She admired her strength, not just in stature, but in spirit. While many people viewed Anna as a spectacle, Victoria saw her as a woman surviving with dignity in a world that constantly misunderstood her. Their connection didn't begin with a grand meeting. It started with a gift. News spread that Anna was getting married, and Queen Victoria sent her a wedding gown. But this wasn't an ordinary dress. It was made with 100 meters of satin and 50 meters of delicate lace, embroidered with orange blossoms. It shimmered like something out of a royal fairy tale. And then came the jewelry, a diamond cluster ring, hand-picked by the Queen herself. The groom received a gold watch and chain, another quiet signal that this was no ordinary union in the eyes of royalty. Anna had become known for her performances, but in this moment she was recognized for her humanity. A queen, someone whose life was surrounded by tradition and image, took the time to honor a woman from rural Nova Scotia who had built her life one stage at a time. It was more than generosity. It was validation. Anna was invited to Buckingham Palace, not once but multiple times. These weren't publicity stunts. There were no reporters at the gates. The meetings were private, respectful, and warm. She was welcomed not as an act, not as a novelty, but as a guest. Inside the palace walls, Anna didn't need to perform. She didn't have to answer questions about her height or explain her childhood. She could sit in a room with the most powerful woman in Britain and be treated as an equal. In a world that so often reduced her to inches and weight, this was a rare space where she could just exist. They spoke about life, about grief, about resilience. Queen Victoria had lost the love of her life, and Anna had spent years trying to build a life of her own. Though they came from opposite sides of society, they found understanding and quiet conversation. The friendship didn't follow rules. There were no headlines, no royal decrees, no performances in the palace. It existed gently behind the scenes, where respect doesn't need applause. It's said that the Queen arranged for Anna's wedding to be held at the Church of St. Martin in the Fields, though records are unclear. Whether or not that detail is true, what remains undeniable is that Queen Victoria saw something in Anna that others often missed. She didn't treat her like a curiosity. She honored her strength, her grace, and the life she had built through persistence and poise. For Anna, this friendship offered something rare, a place where her size didn't enter the room before she did, where her name wasn't printed in bold letters next to exaggerated measurements, where her character mattered more than her silhouette. This royal bond gave her something more than fine gifts and grand halls. It gave her space to breathe, to feel seen for the right reasons. It gave her a reminder that respect could be earned in unexpected ways. The girl who once couldn't fit into a classroom now stood tall in one of the most exclusive rooms in the world. Her confidence grew in those years, not because of fame, but because of moments like these. Moments when her story wasn't about being different, but about being worthy. As her time in Europe continued, so did the applause. But something new was beginning to stir. A different kind of connection was waiting, not in a palace, but somewhere much closer to the heart. Meeting the only man who could look her in the eye. Anna had spent most of her life towering over people, both physically and emotionally. Rooms weren't made for her. Conversations didn't start without someone staring first. Even in success, she stood alone. Then one day, while in Halifax, something unexpected happened. In a sea of familiar looks, she caught sight of someone who didn't look up at her, because he didn't need to. His name was Martin Van Buren Bates. He was from Kentucky, a former soldier, and also a man who stood over 7 feet tall. He had the same broad shoulders, the same commanding frame, the same weariness in his eyes from years of being treated like a public attraction. Their connection wasn't instant in a theatrical way, but it was deep. They didn't just see each other, they understood each other. And in Anna's life, that meant more than anything. The two were introduced by a promoter who saw business potential in pairing them together, but Anna and Martin quickly realized this wasn't just about crowds and posters. It felt personal. They were both used to being talked about instead of talked to. With each conversation, they shared experiences that nobody else could really grasp. They knew what it felt like to not fit in, literally and emotionally. Over time, friendship turned into something softer. They weren't a publicity stunt. They were two people who'd grown tired of navigating the world alone. In each other, they found comfort and peace. Martin didn't gawk or question her size. Anna didn't need to explain herself, and after years of performing for strangers, that simple relief meant everything. In 1871, they married in London. Their wedding wasn't quiet. It couldn't be. They still hold the Guinness World Record for the tallest married couple in history, with a combined height of over 15 feet. Crowds followed them from the moment they announced their engagement. Newspapers covered the ceremony like it was a royal event. But behind the headlines, the couple was focused on something else, building a real life together. Touring together became part of their routine. They traveled as a pair, standing on stages across Europe and North America. They knew they would always attract attention, so they used that platform wisely. Audiences came for the spectacle, but left remembering their warmth and wit. They weren't just a duo of giants, they were a team. And when the show ended each night, they retreated into a world of their own. Eventually, the couple decided it was time for stability. They bought a home in Seville, Ohio, and not just any home. They had it custom built from the ground up to fit their unique needs. Ceilings were raised, doorways widened, furniture crafted to fit their frames. Even the windows were placed higher than usual, so they could enjoy the view without having to bend down. The front of the house was designed for them, tall, open, and grand. But the back of the house had rooms of average size for guests and staff. It was a thoughtful space, blending their reality with the needs of others. That balance defined who they were as a couple. They embraced their difference without making others feel out of place. In that home, Anna finally felt what she had been searching for since childhood, a sense of belonging. She no longer had to explain herself or adapt to the world around her. For once, the world had been built with her in mind. With Martin by her side, every room felt like it fit. She didn't need to shrink to be loved. She could be exactly as she was. Martin supported her in ways that were quiet but steady. He understood what it felt like to have strangers ask intrusive questions or to be photographed without permission. He stood with her, not behind her, and she returned that same strength. Together, they weren't two individuals trying to survive. They were building something. For the first time, Anna wasn't alone in the weight she carried. Her experiences, her fame, her exhaustion, they were shared. And from that space of understanding, a new hope began to grow. Anna started to imagine something beyond the stage, beyond even marriage. She wanted a family, a child, a legacy that wasn't measured in inches or ticket sales, but in love, something that would finally feel whole. The pain of losing what you waited for. Anna had stood in front of crowds all over the world. She had shared her story, answered their questions, and kept her head high when strangers turned her into a headline. But none of that prepared her for what came in 1872. That year, Anna became pregnant with her first child. It was something she had wanted deeply. A life that wasn't about performance, but about family. She was ready to step into a new role, one she had long dreamed about. When the time came, she delivered a baby girl. The child weighed 18 pounds, larger than most newborns, but she was still just a baby. The delivery was difficult. Anna's body, already under stress from years of carrying her size, struggled through the labor. The baby didn't survive. She was born and lost all in the same breath. No one could prepare her for that silence. Anna, who had spent her life being seen by thousands, now sat in a quiet room with nothing in her arms. She didn't speak publicly about the loss. It wasn't something she could put into words on a stage, but those close to her saw the change. She still stood tall, but her posture was heavier. She still smiled, but not as often. Martin tried to hold them both together. They leaned on each other, and for a while that was enough to keep moving forward. Years passed. Anna returned to touring briefly, then stepped away again. The idea of family still lived inside her. She still hoped. In 1879, after years of waiting and mourning, she became pregnant for the second time. This time it was a boy, and from the beginning, it was clear that this child would be unlike any other. As the pregnancy progressed, doctors and midwives watched with uncertainty. Anna's size had always drawn attention, but the size of her unborn child started raising serious concern. By the time she went into labor in January, she had already lost 6 gallons of fluid. The delivery was long and difficult. When the baby finally crowned, the doctor realized something chilling. His head was too large for the forceps. There was no way to assist the delivery using standard tools. The baby was born with a cloth tied around his neck to help ease him through the birth canal. He weighed 23 pounds and measured 30 inches long, nearly the size of a 6-month-old. It was the largest newborn on record. Martin later wrote that the child looked like a toddler at birth. His size made headlines around the world, but no headline could capture the fear in the room that day. Anna held her son. For a few short hours, she got to look at the face of the child she had carried, prayed for, and waited years to meet. But at just 11 hours old, he died. There was no medical explanation that brought comfort. His lungs were too weak, his body too big for this world. This second loss didn't just break Anna's heart, it broke something deeper. 2 children gone, 2 pregnancies that ended in grief. She had faced public judgment for her body her entire life, but this pain came from inside and no one could see it. There was no audience for this part of her story. No crowd cheering, no spotlight following her. Just quiet, heavy grief. After the death of her son, Anna stepped away from performing. She no longer had the strength to keep smiling in front of strangers. Depression set in, not loudly, but slowly, taking pieces of her joy each day. Even when she tried to rejoin the circus or appear at exhibitions, the spark was dimmed, the stage felt cold. The costumes didn't fit the way they used to. The applause felt distant. Martin stayed close, doing what he could to support her, but even he couldn't fill the space that loss had created. They had tried to build something beautiful. They had tried to bring life into the world, to create a family that belonged only to them, and both times the world took it away. Anna, once a symbol of physical strength, now carried emotional weight that no one could measure. Her grief wasn't dramatic. It was quiet, constant, and unspoken in public. She didn't need sympathy. She needed space. And so she stopped performing and pulled away from the traveling life. And from that point on, everything began to slow down. A quiet life among the fields and hymns. After years of traveling, applause, and loss, Anna and Martin settled into something slower. They retired to their farm in Seville, Ohio, a place where the noise of the world finally faded. The community in Seville welcomed them. They had seen the headlines, but in town, Anna and Martin weren't performers. They were neighbors. People waved to them on the road. Some came by to visit the farm, not out of curiosity, but friendship. Children weren't afraid of Anna's size. They asked questions and she answered with patience. She had spent years being stared at. Now she was finally being understood. The Baptist church became a big part of their life. It was a small building with wooden pews, the kind that didn't exactly work for a couple standing nearly 8 feet tall. So the congregation had special pews built just for them. It wasn't a grand gesture. It was thoughtful. And that thoughtfulness made all the difference. Anna and Martin attended services regularly. They found peace in the scriptures, in the hymns, in the familiarity of a community that had made room for them in more ways than one. For Anna, this place brought her back to something she had dreamed about years before: teaching. She had once tried to study in a city where she didn't fit in, where people stared and whispered. That dream had been crushed. But here in Seville, it returned in the best way. She began teaching Sunday school. It wasn't a formal classroom and the students weren't seated in tidy rows, but she had children who listened to her, learned from her, asked questions. She had a chance to guide young minds, not from a stage, but from her heart. Her dream didn't need a blackboard, it only needed a space where she belonged. Outside the church and the fields, there was another part of Anna's life that people in town still remember: her love for animals. After everything she had been through in the world of performance, she had a soft spot for the creatures who had once been part of that world too. She and Martin adopted animals that had aged out of the circus, ones that couldn't perform anymore or had nowhere else to go. Among them was a monkey named Buttons. He wasn't a quiet farm companion. He caused mischief, tugged on guests' coats, and once reportedly made off with someone's hat. But Anna adored him. He was small, loud, unpredictable, everything she had never been allowed to be. The slower years on the farm gave Anna something she had been missing her whole life: freedom. Not the freedom to go anywhere or do anything, but the freedom to just be. She didn't need to squeeze into clothes that didn't fit. She didn't need to explain why her shoes were handmade. She didn't need to defend the space she took up in the world. Her body, which had drawn crowds and headlines, was no longer a symbol of difference. It was just hers. She moved through the farm and through the town with a sense of peace. But even in that peace, her health was beginning to shift. She had lived a life that was constantly observed, measured, and judged. Now in the quiet, her body was asking for rest. Time was moving, and Anna could feel it, not in any dramatic way, but in the slow changes she didn't talk about out loud. A life that ended too quietly. And then on August 5, 1888, the sun set on the farm in Seville like any other day. There was no warning, no dramatic sign. Anna went to bed in the house she had built with Martin, surrounded by the life they had carefully crafted together. She never woke up. Her heart gave out in her sleep, just one day before her 42nd birthday. Martin found her the next morning. For a man who had faced battlefields and sold-out halls, this was a different kind of silence. He didn't have to say much. Everyone in town already knew what she meant to him. The woman who had stood taller than nearly every person alive had left the world quietly, without noise, without farewell. The funeral was simple but full of meaning. Locals gathered, friends came from nearby farms and towns. There were no flashing cameras or ticket lines, just people who had seen Anna for who she was. She was buried in Seville, not far from the field she loved, next to the baby boy she had lost years earlier. Martin made sure her grave didn't just blend in with the rest. He had a monument built, a tall stone reminder of the woman who had once drawn global attention but chose a quiet life in the end. Years passed. Martin remarried. His second wife was average in size, and the home he had built with Anna no longer worked for their daily life. So he sold the house. The walls that had once been made to fit giants now echoed with different footsteps. But Martin never let go of Anna. When his time came, he asked to be buried beside her and their child. Even with a new life, his final wish was to return to the place where his heart had always lived. In time, museums picked up her story. Not the tabloid version, not the exaggerated posters, the real story. The girl from Nova Scotia who wanted to be a teacher, the performer who saved people during a fire, the woman who held grief quietly and kept going, the wife who found peace in a small Ohio town. Her life became a study in resilience, in quiet power, in choosing grace even when the world tried to reduce her to numbers. Decades later, people are still learning about her, and when they do, it's no longer just about her size, it's about her life. A life that ended quietly but echoes louder than anyone could have guessed. Legacy bigger than posters and headlines. In her lifetime, Anna Haining Bates was featured on posters that made wild claims about her height. Some said she was over 8 feet tall. Some added extra inches just to sell more tickets. The bigger the number, the bigger the crowd. But the real number, just under 7 feet 11 inches, was already astonishing. She didn't need exaggeration. She didn't need a headline to stretch the truth. Her presence alone stopped people mid-step. At one point, Anna was billed above Chang and Eng, the world-famous conjoined twins who were celebrities in their own right. They had drawn attention for years, but when Anna's name went on a poster above theirs, it meant something. She had become the main attraction, not for shock value, but because audiences couldn't forget her. Today, Anna's name still holds a place in the Guinness World Records. Her height remains one of the most remarkable in documented history. But even more staggering is the record held by her newborn son. He was the largest baby ever born, weighing 23 pounds and measuring 30 inches. That single fact makes jaws drop, even now. But behind that number is a story of loss, of love, and of a mother who carried more than just physical weight. What stands out is how Anna's legacy has shifted over time. She's no longer remembered through the lens of outdated freak show posters. Her image has been reclaimed by historians, museums, and people who care about telling the full story. In Seville, Ohio, the town she called home, there's an exhibit dedicated to her life. Visitors come to see the place where she found peace after years of performing. They look at her furniture, her personal belongings, and get a sense of the woman who once stood too tall for any standard space. Halifax, Nova Scotia, has preserved her memory too. It's where she was born, where her journey began, long before stages and crowds became part of her world. The museum there doesn't just show what she looked like. It explores what she felt, what she endured, and how she moved through a world that often wasn't built to hold someone like her. She didn't just leave behind records, she left behind a reminder that dignity can live in someone who's always being stared at. That kindness doesn't shrink when it's met with cruelty, that a woman can be both strong and soft, and still be heard even after the applause fades. Her story continues to reach new people every year, and each time someone hears her name, it carries a little more truth. Not the poster version, not the circus version, but the real one, the one that matters, the one that lasts. So, what are your thoughts on this? Let us know in the comments down below.